Look real close at this face. This is the guy who is going to start World War III. He is set to take power, officially take power, in Colombia, 7th of August of this year. He's already said, in no uncertain terms, he is done with peace in his country. He's going to renounce the deal with the FARC. He is going to begin slaughtering wholesale his enemies. He's already begun. It's one of the dirty, nasty stories that no one is reporting. But there are going to be folks that are going to push back, and they're going to have help. Now, this came out last night. I almost did a video before I went to bed, but right after this meeting in Helsinki, the ambassador to Venezuela from Russia warned that there are intentions now for the U.S. to invade Venezuela vis-a-vis Colombia. And I think now it's only a matter of time. They're waiting for Duque to get installed. And they are going to attempt to put boots on the ground and use U.S. military assets, now that Colombia is a member of NATO, to invade Venezuela. And the Russians aren't going to stand for it. And mark my words, I'm going to call it right here, and you can hold me to it. If the U.S. does this, the U.S. is going to have a grand total of 2 allies down there, Panama and Colombia. Every other nation down there will side with Venezuela. Even though they don't like Venezuela, they hate us more. And it will be the U.S. versus every Latin American country from Mexico to the tip of Chile, to the exclusion of Panama and Colombia. That's why there's going to be a problem. Because those countries combined are fairly formidable. Now, we could carpet bomb the place into extinction if we wanted to, nuke it, sit there and just bomb it for the next 6 or 8 months, and call that winning. But I think my audience is smart enough to know that that's not really winning. You'd have to ask yourself why Colombia would have asked our leader to do this. Why would it matter to Colombia if the Russians were supporting Venezuela if there wasn't a plan for war? See, the people on the ground already know this. I've covered this before, and I know to a lot of folks that aren't educated about the region and what's going on, that this would seem like irrelevant. But this guy, this leader, the FARC, he was trying to bring their argument with the Colombian government to a political forum where it could be spoken of and dealt with like adults. They gave him a Senate seat to do so. But now he's even seen that it's going to be settled with weapons. Now, this having all been said, we're going to talk about something here that I brought up a few pictures to try to illustrate. You see, there was another group of people a long time ago that thought it would be a great idea to get away from heavy-handed government and go run out into the middle of nowhere to get away from them. Just like you folks, preppers. You think the farther away from Washington, the farther away from any kind of authority at all, the better off you'll be. These were called the pioneers. And they came out here armed with rifles, armed with technology that was vastly superior to the natives in the region. But what did we see? They stood no chance against the Indian war parties, and they showed up with bows and arrows, spears, and tomahawks. but they showed up at night. They showed up in force. These people here in the wagon trains were civilized people. The people that were attacking were not. That is the fallacy, the overriding fallacy of your argument about holing up in the middle of nowhere. So they started to do things like this, and they were burned out. I know there's a lot of folks out there going, yeah, well, we defeated the Native Americans. Yes, the military, in an organized fashion, went out and systematically, with proactive operations, took them out over a period of years, yes. But they didn't do it by creating unsupported fire bases that are grocery stores out in the middle of nowhere. Rifles or not, more technology or not, I don't care how many paper targets you've shot at, or how many cans you've knocked off hay bales. The Spanish figured this out a long time ago. I live in this region. This is Castillo de San Marco. It was the first masonry fort in the Americas, built 1627. St. Augustine was founded 1565, and after the city, even with the support of the Spanish and having rifles, was burned to the ground 7 times by natives and the French to some extent. They realized they needed a masonry fort and a military presence to secure the region. Without it, the region was lawless. This is the other end of that. This is Fort Matanzas. If you want to look into the geography of St. Augustine and the history, it would inform you a great deal as to the fallacy of this idea of being out in the middle of nowhere with no support and your rifles and your groceries. And if you don't think the guys that are coming are organized and trained, think again. They are angry from having been in prison. And I'll say it again, there are gonna be no guards showing up affecting any kind of an assassination plot en masse across this country. Even talking about the top 10% of the most violent, that's 250,000 guys. The guards aren't showing up. There's no plan. There's no gas. There's no nothing like that. There might be, in some of the most maximum security facilities, some tear gas type of systems installed, but not poison. It'd be untenable and ridiculous. Too much of a security risk. So these guys, these are Brazilian gangs. If you want to look into what happens when the government has to prioritize where they provide security and where they don't, look into Brazil. Look what happens when these guys get a little tiny bit of freedom, when there's even a little bit of a hiccup in security. The vast swaths they take over. And when they come, and they're coming, they're not stupid. They're coming at night. And they don't care if they lose a few guys. Go ahead, take pot shots with your rifles. You'll lose complete situational awareness of 180 degrees behind you when you are on sight picture in front of you. You're going to need, and for those of you that are like 200 miles out in the middle of nowhere, living on military-style compounds with 3 dozen and 4 dozen guys, that's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Joe Blow, who bought a house 20 miles from town, out in the middle of nowhere, who's got maybe 3 or 4 neighbors, maybe a fence, and a big 3,000 square foot 4-bedroom house that he's taken and dedicated a bedroom or maybe a basement to turning into a grocery store, who goes to the range on the weekends and shoots paper targets with his buddies and calls himself a prepper. That's who I'm talking to, 90% of preppers. You are overmatched, outgunned, and with no support, you are a sitting duck. The Spanish knew it. The English learned it the hard way. So did the French to some extent. In fact, We'll leave with this since we're at 10 minutes. I'm not going to play it now, but listen to this story from The Patriot, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the story of Fort Wilderness. And think about it in a modern context. He's not talking about war here. He's talking, I mean, technically it was the French and Indian Wars, what we call it historically. But what he was talking about was survival out in the middle of nowhere with no government and no security to fall back on. And how only the most violent and heinous, horrible men will be the ones in control. It's going to be to your level of willingness to be the meanest group out there. And sitting back, waiting to defend, isn't going to get the job done. If we see a situation where the government loses control for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, your survivability is zero. You can look into the history of the conflict of the FARC and the ELN, Colombia, Brazil, Venezuela, and you can see all sorts of parallels and analogs to the situation that you're describing and what works and what doesn't work. But war is coming. This is the guy that's going to start it. And the Russians have confirmed it. Like, share, subscribe.